Hi everybody. In this video we're going to look at how to find circumference of a circle. And so before we dig in, we just need to go over a couple important parts of a circle so that when this vocab comes up, you know exactly what we're talking about. The first is the radius of a circle. So if you look at the top left example, you'll notice that it is a line that goes about halfway. So it doesn't go fully across the circle, and it does hit the center. So that's pretty important. Doesn't go the full way, but it does hit the center and goes to the outside, so about halfway across the circle. In comparison, if we look at the diameter example, that goes the full length of the circle, but again, it does hit the center. So it goes from outside to outside, passing through the center. That would be the diameter. Only halfway would be a radius. If you look at the circumference, it's highlighted in green here, it would be the distance around a circle. So kind of on the outside of that circle. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, I've mentioned before how circles are weird. So if we think about other shapes, you hopefully learned last year about perimeter. And perimeter, again, is the distance around a two-dimensional shape, but with other shapes, that's normally found by adding the sides together. So if I look at this rectangle, to find the distance around the outside here, I would take those sides and add them together. So a 3 plus 5 plus 3 plus 5. And I would get that my perimeter here would be 16. Now, some people like to do 2 times 3 and then plus 2 times 5, or do 3 plus 5 and then multiply by 2. All of that's great for a rectangle. But again, I added the sides together and I got 16. Similarly, for a triangle, I would add my sides together, so 3 plus 4 plus 5. This time I don't have any repeats of sides, and I would get that this triangle has a perimeter, distance around the outside, of 12. So circles are weird. If I wanted to find the distance around a circle, I don't have sides to add together. So this video, we're going to be talking about how do we find it if we don't have sides to just add together. So the last class before spring break, we spent measuring the diameter and the circumference of different round cylindrical items. So if you remember, we had things like coffee tins and water bottles and big clocks from rooms. And so we measured the distance around the outside and then the distance straight across from end to end through the center of the circle. We then took those measurements and divided them. So the circumference divided by the diameter. And we looked at some results. So I had taken 2 class results here. So you might see your initials on this list, and you look at the circumference and the diameter, and then this highlighted column shows what they got when they took that number for circumference and divided it by the diameter. Now I specifically chose these examples because if you look, they are all in that 3-point something range, and even more specifically than that, they all get pretty close to 3.14, and I could keep going of 1, 5, 9. And hopefully you're thinking that number sounds familiar because all of these got pretty darn close to pi. So we're going to look at that relationship and how that might help us find the circumference. So here's what our results from last class can tell us. We found out that taking any circle's circumference and dividing it by its diameter should give you the number 3.1415926, etc., 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 aka pi. So if my goal is to find the circumference, how can I do that? And if you think about diameter, that's pretty easy to have on a circle because it's the distance from end to end through the center. So let's say that I want the circumference, we're going to call that C, and let's say that I have the diameter, and that's going to be the letter D. So I want the circumference, I have the diameter. I'm going to shorten these each to a letter each. So let's look here at this. Again, I want the circumference. So let's think algebraically for a second. I want C by itself. Right now, it's being divided by D. So think back to solving equations. How can I undo dividing something by D? Well, I would use its inverse. So to get rid of dividing, I would multiply by D. But whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other, so I would multiply pi by D as well. So the D's on the left would cancel out, and that would leave me with, so the circumference comes from taking pi and multiplying it by its diameter. There it is. We use pi and where it comes from to help us find the distance around a circle. So this is important to write, and we're going to use this a lot in the coming days. But circumference, the formula for calculating circumference would be C, and again that stands for circumference, is equal to pi times the diameter. Now you don't have to put that multiplication symbol there, of course, but you multiply the diameter by pi. So let's just quickly go through some examples. Let's say here in the circle I have a diameter of 5. I want to figure out what would the distance around the outside of that circle be if straight across is 5. So I'm going to use my formula. Since I have the diameter, I know that circumference is going to come from pi times the diameter. Here, my diameter is 5. So instead of pi times d, I'm going to do pi times 5. Now on your calculator, you might notice that you have a pi button. Some do and some don't. We're going to use 3.14 for pi. So we're going to round it ourselves. So in my calculator, I would take 3.14 and multiply that by 5. And that would tell me that the distance around this particular circle would be 15.7. Now it's important to note that let's say this was 5 inches. Circumference would also just be inches. It's just a distance, two-dimensional, no need to square it or anything like that. Looking at the next one, it says calculate the circumference, this time if the diameter was 7.5. So just like we started with last time, I know that I'm going to take pi and multiply it by the diameter. Here my diameter is 7.5. In my calculator, I'm just going to round for right now and use 3.14. And that would tell me that my circumference for this circle would be 23 55/100, so 23.55. Again, let's say it said 7.5 centimeters. My circumference would be 23.55 centimeters. Another common piece of information about a circle would be its radius. And if you remember from the beginning of this video, we talked about how a radius is about half of a diameter. Another way we could say that is that if we put 2 radius, the plural of radius is radii, if we put 2 radii together, I would have 1 full diameter. So looking here at this example, you see I have a diameter all the way across and a radius just halfway across. If I were to take that radius and put another one on the other side of that circle, I would see that 2 radii would be the same as 1 diameter. So let's say I don't know the diameter of a circle, but this time I know the radius. If I want the circumference, and I know that before I did pi times the diameter, well now I need essentially double that because I'm only working with a radius. So instead of diameter, I'm going to put in 2r where the diameter used to be because I know that 2 radius is the same as 1 diameter. So I would do pi times 2r. But I don't know about you, that looks a little funky. In math, we're used to having numbers in front. So we're going to take this formula and just rearrange it a little bit for c equals 2 times pi times r. So it just looks a little bit fancier with that number in front instead of pi. And again, this comes from the fact that 1 diameter is 2 radius, or radii. So let's look at some examples when we have the radius instead of a full diameter. This time I have to remember to put that 2 out in front. Since I'm only working with radius, I have to multiply by 2. So 2 times pi, and for this first example, it says my radius is 3. Now if I want to, I could kind of go ahead and multiply my 2 and 3 together, so I could say that would be 6 pi. And then again, let's use 3.14 in our calculators. So I'm going to be doing 6 times 3.14, and plugging that into my calculator, that would tell me that the circumference here would be 18.84. Let's just do one more. So the second example, a little bit bigger, it says this time the radius is 12.5. Again, since I have a radius, I want to be multiplying everything by 2. So 2 times pi times 12.5. Again, if I want to, I could kind of simplify that right now and say that 2 times 12.5 would be 25 pi. And then to round in my calculator, it would be 25 times 3.14. And I would find that my circumference of this particular circle would be 78.5. So you're going to practice this on your own now. Don't forget, when you have a radius, multiply it by 2. If you have the full diameter, you're just going to take it and multiply it by pi. Good luck!